Hello, just wanted to make a quick video, hopefully a quick one, to show you some of the switch settings on the 302. If you missed class or if you just want a refresher, this should be a good guide. So on our input stage of the device, we got 3 XLR inputs. In input 1, I have this shotgun mic plugged in, and since this is a condenser microphone, we need phantom power. So it's not an ice cream cone style stage live mic. This is a condenser, and we do need to power it. So first of all, we're going to make sure this is set to mic level, not line level, because line level is only for connecting devices together, not microphones. So in order to activate phantom, we have to make sure that the device is allowing 48 volts across the board to all 3 inputs. So we switch this from the left to the right setting, so 48V is activated. Now we can actually decide, now that it's activated, which of these 3 mic ins is going to use phantom. The way we do that is we use these switches, these white ones. There are 3, 1 for each channel. So on the left, we see PH for phantom. In the middle, we see DYN for dynamic mics, like our ice cream cone style stage mics. And then on the right-hand side, we have T-Power. Now, T-Power isn't something you're going to come across. I've never used a T-Power mic in my career. As far as I understand, they're for kind of older technology, not really applicable for the kind of work we're doing. So let's not use that ever, unless the odd chance you have a T-powered mic. So I'm going to switch phantom on for channel 1. And you'll notice we have the same mic line switch for channel 2. We have the same phantom abilities for channel 2, and likewise for channel 3. You'll notice on channel 3, instead of this switch being horizontal, it's vertical. It's up and down. And that's just to save space on the device so they could cram all of this happiness onto this side panel. Okay, let's move to the front face of the device. All right, so let's pretend I have not already set a level. I'm going to turn our gain down. I'm going to turn our fader down. The way I like to start is make sure you protect your ears. I would keep my headphone level all the way down. And let's actually just use our eyes to see the meter first. So I like to put my fader at 12 o'clock. You'll notice it's kind of hard to see. Let me move this fader a little. You can get a better view. There's a 0 at the top at 12 o'clock. 0 means unity gain. It means neutral. It means we're not using the fader to add or subtract any decibels from our volume. So remember in class we talk about gain versus volume, right? So first, when we're plugging a mic in, the signal path goes obviously through the microphone, through the cable, into input 1. And the first kind of stage of level control we have is our gain. Our gain is our most important setting when we're adjusting a microphone's level. So we're going to pop this button out, and we're going to turn it until we start to see, and well, maybe not at this stage here because we're protecting our ears. We're going to get a good level first. Then maybe we're going to turn up our headphone level until we have a comfortable volume. So we first initiated our gain level. And once we're kind of peaking around, I like to peak on this device around +8, maybe. So check, check, check. At my loudest, I'm at about +8. I'm still at about 75% of that meter. So if I get a little bit louder, you know, we will activate that limiter as a safety net. Check, check, check. Hello! And we can see our limiter LED is activating. All right. So we have a pretty decent level now with our gain. Most important step. So we're going to lock our setting for gain by pushing this knob in. So that way we can't accidentally hit the knob and change our gain setting. So I'm going to keep our fader at 12 o'clock. Check, check, check. And if I turn it up, you'll notice I'm really boosting our volume. So again, we come back to volume versus gain. Gain is our input level, volume is our output level. So why we're seeing this meter go all the way to the top when our fader is turned all the way up is because we are now setting our output level of that microphone to these left and right outputs. But actually, we're only sending our signal through our left output. We'll notice that not both sides of the meters are moving. It's only the left side. So that brings us to our LCR switch. Let's see if we can get a good view on that. So there in the bottom left-hand corner, the switch under our fader. Obviously, left is on the left-hand side, right is on the right-hand side. But what is C? C is center. So let's toggle through it, and I want you to watch the meters moving. So right now, it's set to L. We're only seeing the left meter move. I'm going to switch it to the right. Oh, my fat fingers can't get in there. Okay, so I've switched it to the right setting, and now we're sending that boom mic out of the right channel only. So what is C? What is the middle button? Well, that's center. So if we switch it to center, now that boom mic is sending out of both the left and right outputs. So we're going to be getting a signal from both of these XLR L and R outputs, or channels 1 and 2, channels L and R, whatever you call it, whatever you want to call it. So I would advise to never use this center switch setting. The reason for that, if we have multiple microphones plugged in, if we have a boom and even just say one lav, just using 2 mics, if these are switched to center, they're no longer going to be isolated when we send out of the camera. Because remember, we want our boom on the left and our lavs on the right. But if we set these to center, both mics will be mixed together. They're going to be glued together, so you can never remove them. You can never separate them in post. So we want to make sure, just to keep being repetitive, that our boom is always set to L and our lavs on channels 2 and 3 are always set to R. Let's move to the next switch setting. Here we have a low cut filter switch. And to remind you what that means, that is cutting the low rumbly, the lowest of the bass out of our recording. So if you're in a really, you're outside and there's kind of a hum of traffic, if you switch this up to 80, we are cutting all the bass below 80 hertz. So really, you might be wondering, well, isn't that going to remove the bass from my vocal recording or from my dialogue? Well, not really, because there's not very useful information that low in the audio spectrum. So if we're cutting out that 80 hertz and below, we're still going to have very intelligible, very robust audio quality. So it's not that bad to use 80 hertz, especially 80 hertz low cut filter if we're working outside, if we're working in maybe, a room, a cafeteria, and there's a low level rumble and bass. You might want to switch this to 80. Now, you'll notice down here, if we switch it to the bottom, it says 160. Now, this is really for more extreme situations. So let's say you're shooting an interview at the backstage of a concert, or you're out in a really loud, really bassy environment, or maybe you're having a terrible problem with wind. This can help if you switch it to the more extreme setting, 160, which means we're cutting out all bass below 160 hertz. And then in the middle, there's a neutral setting, and that means there is no low-cut filter activated whatsoever. We're bypassing the filter. We're not cutting any bass. So just to remind you, another name for a low-pass filter is high-cut filter. Or sorry, I said that wrong. Another term for low-cut filter is high-pass. But I like to use the term low-cut because it's more intuitive for what we're doing. We're cutting the lows. But high-pass is also seen in a lot of audio terminology. Means the same thing. So you'll notice for each channel, we have our LCR switch for our panning matrix. We have our low cut filter. I'm going to put it back to 80 as default, as I like to do. And these switches repeat for each channel, right? Again, for channel 2, low cut filter, panning matrix. For channel 3, low cut filter, panning matrix. Okay, so there is another switch here that you're probably not going to use. This is called a phase inversion switch. Now, sometimes you might get a cable that's been wired incorrectly, and it might cause phasing issues if you're doing a recording. But really, this is something you don't touch unless you know what you're doing. So I'd advise you keep this set to off. The other switch I'd like you to look at is our limiter switch here. So if we switch it to the left, it's off. If we switch it to the middle, our lim, or our limiter, is activated. So we can see, check, check, our limiter LED goes on. If we turn it off, we no longer have an indicator for limiter because it's not on. Check, 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 right? So there's a third setting, and I don't ever want to see you guys using this. It is link. So that means that if you have your tracks isolated, your boom on the left and your lavs on the right, let's say your boom hits the limiter, it hits the top of the meter, but your lavs don't because they're further away from the sound source for whatever reason, or vice versa. Your lav hits the limiter, but your boom doesn't. The link setting will actually limit both channels at the same time. They're glued together in terms of the limiter. So we want our limiter to be isolated. We want it to be unique for each left and right channel. So we're going to set that back to the middle setting. So it's just the limiter being on, no linking happening. So there's a button here with a sunshine icon. This is just simply for the brightness of our LEDs. Whoa, that's blindingly bright. So maybe useful for outdoor sunny days. But indoors, you know, you're probably going to want to use a more, a less visually abrasive brightness. Then we have our peak VU button. Now, ordinarily, if this was set to factory default, we can toggle between different kinds of meter ballistics. Right now, we're set to peak, or PPM. And we'll notice that we have an LED that lingers behind, and that's called peak hold. You guys have probably heard of this in year 1. So peak hold will stay there for a second after I stop talking. That might be useful if you're boom operating and mixing at the same time, and you can't always have your eyes on the meter. So let's say you hear a sound, you think, oh, did that hit the meter or not? Check! And then if I have a boom in my hands, I have an extra second or two to kind of look down at my meter to see the last loudest peak. So that's peak hold. So I've heard people call them sticky LEDs. Whatever you need to remember, that this is just the last loudest peak. It'll hold for a second or two. So, like I was saying, ordinarily this peak/VU button will toggle between peak and RMS or VU metering. If this button is deactivated in the setup menu, which I don't want you guys changing. If it's already showing peak, that's perfect. But you may have a device where it's enabled for you to toggle through the different kinds of meter ballistics. So always use peak and always use these sticky LEDs that hang there, those peak hold LEDs that stay there for an extra second. That is what you want to use when we're hitting that 75% range on our meter. All right, so moving over to this switch here. You'll notice it shows a few different settings here. Let's focus. So the shadow makes it difficult to see, but the first setting down here is number 1. We can go to number 2, number 3. Now we have L, R, and ST. Oh, M and ST. I'm going to go through what these mean. So since we have a mic plugged into channel 1, we can actually listen to just channel 1. So if you suspect there's a problematic mic on set and you're trying to figure out which one is the problem child, you can switch between your 3 mic inputs. Now the cool thing about this is when we have this switched to our selected mic, we are listening to that microphone before it hits the fader. So this is called pre-fader listen, PFL. Most audio devices have a setting. So it's a way of soloing it before it even gets to the meter. So let's turn or before it even gets to the fader, should I say. So let's turn our fader all the way down. And you'll notice that doesn't even affect our meter. We're still hearing channel 1. And if I boost this like crazy, our meter is still, in an appropriate place. Our gain doesn't appear to be changed. Our metering doesn't appear to be changed. Again, we're listening to this signal of channel 1 before we're making modifications or adding or subtracting its volume level. So again, gain level is on our gain knob. So that's for our input level. And our fader is controlling our output level. So if we want to listen before it hits the fader, we can switch to channel 1. We can do the same thing with monitor select for channel 2, for channel 3. And here's where it kind of changes. We can listen to just L, just the left channel. So that's listening not to the input level, but it's listening to the left output level. So we're hearing what this output to camera is sending. So for example, if I turn my fader up, check, 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 we're boosting it, right? And if we turn our fader down, we can no longer see our level, just like in stereo mode. So this fader controls what we're sending output to the camera, and this headphone monitoring selection will show us the output, not the input, for channel L. We can do the same thing for channel R, but I don't have anything going through channel R at the moment. And then the next setting here is M for mono sum. Now this is a dangerous setting that I don't recommend. I emphasize in class a lot that we want to have everything isolated. Isolation is the name of the game. We want our boom clean on our left channel, going through our mixer and sending out of our left channel. And we want it going into channel 1 or our left channel of the camera. We want that boom clean in the camera on our left channel, right? So if this is set to M, let's say we have multiple microphones plugged in right now, it's going to mix everything together. And we won't be able to tell if we're listening to our real stereo mix or if our microphones are properly isolated on their respective correct channels. So I do not recommend using the M or mono sum selection. What I do recommend you guys use always is the ST or stereo setting. Right? So that stereo setting is going to show us exactly what we're sending out to camera. That's really important because we want to have a confidence check that what we're sending out to camera is in fact isolated, boom on the left, lavs on the right. So this is the one to use 100% of the time in this class. I wouldn't recommend using M. However, if you do want to pre-fader listen to channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, you can use those. They might come in handy to solo your tracks. But I'm going to put this back to stereo. There are a few extra options. I'm not going to really go through them because they're for specific stereo miking setups. But we're not going to be doing anything that complicated in this class. So I would say don't even bother turning this knob higher than the stereo setting or selecting anything above that on this list. So next up to the right, we have our headphone volume. And this is just for your listening comfort. This is make sure you have a healthy volume that you're able to hear everything clearly. And once you've found your comfort, you can push it in to lock it, just like our gain knobs up there. Another thing to note, we'll notice that if we crank our headphone volume, this little headphone LED, check, 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 it's going to flash red. And this is showing us that our headphone output is distorting. Our headphone output is way too hot. So if you see this light flashing, it means your headphones are cranked and your gain is set too low. So we're going to dial this back to a comfortable setting and we're going to lock it. So when that light goes on, it doesn't mean that our mic is actually clipping on the input. It means that our headphones are clipping on our output. One of the last things I want to show you here is our battery button. We can hold this battery button to show us how much battery life is left. So you can see our batteries are maybe 50% used. And if they were 100% charged, we would see the whole LED array lit up. But we're kind of losing power after a little bit of time here. So this is how much battery life we have left. All right, I hope this is helpful. I hope it's a good refresher. And if you have any questions, always email me. I'm always there to answer any confusing or frustrating issues with your 302 or with your mics or whatever. So thank you very much and have a good night.